In this lesson, we will learn how to display quantitative data in StatCrunch. So the first thing that we're going to do in StatCrunch is we're going to create a stem plot. And again, we talked last week about how to load your own data into StatCrunch, in which case you would just visit the website and then copy and paste your data or open it from your computer. You can also look at data sets from your textbook. And what I did last week was I was dealing with those golf drive lengths. So that would be this data set right here. And let's go ahead and make our stem plot based on this data. So as you can see, when I'm looking at the data, it has the variable name at the top. And again, there's no letters in my actual data set. So if you have letters, you're going to end up with some trouble. So I'm just going to go to graph, and I'm going to go to stem and leaf, and I'm going to choose my average drive length. And again, if I had more than one column that I wanted to use, I would just use the shift click or command click, etc., to make sure that that worked. Where I just let it go right here into that same spreadsheet. Group by, which is optional, you would only do that if you were dealing with, say, more than one data set, etc. Leaf unit, you can change that. I'm just going to let it choose for itself. And of course, we don't want to do any outlier trimming. I chose extreme only. You could also just choose none, which means it's not going to trim any of the outliers off. And then compute. And as we can see, we've got a nice average drive length. It tells me the leaf unit is 1. So basically it's taken these values and it has rounded them off to the nearest whole value. You can always go back into the options to change. So options edit. I can say I want my leaves to be that 10th digit and then compute. And now we can see that it's much different because this would be 269.8. So leaf unit is the 10th place instead. So you can kind of choose which is the best, whatever suits your needs most. We're also going to make a dot plot with this data. So again, I'm just going to go to graph and then dot plot. And we did some dot plots in class, but this is a great way for technology to do it, so it's going to look a lot better. So I'm going to choose my average drive length. Again, I'm going to let where be optional because I'm just going to let it be right in my spreadsheet. Group by, again, just like before, not important with this particular data set. We're going to plot groups for each column. There's just one column. Point size, that just changes how big those dots are. This is kind of cool. You can choose to show the mean or the median, which is kind of neat, but you certainly don't have to do that. You, of course, if you were doing this for, say, a case study or something, you would want to make sure that you have the appropriate title and labels, etc. And then click compute. So as you can see here, it does tell me it's the average drive length. It doesn't tell me any frequency over here. It doesn't give me a title. So those are things that you would want to add in. Again, just going into options and edit, and then adding those values here. I do want to show you how to now make 2 or 3, or in this case, we're going to do 4 dot plots so that we can compare data distribution. So as you can see, I've got a lot of values here. We're going to focus on the price, which is the average price of pizza, a slice of pizza. So I'm going to go to graph, and I'm going to go to dot plot, just as I did before. And now I want to choose just the ones that say price. So I'm going to choose this one, and then I'm going to choose this one, and I'm just holding my command key, Chicago price and Denver price. So again, I'm just holding command as I click those so that I can select just those 4. For group by, again, I don't care, but for grouping options, I want to make sure I plot groups for each column. A group for each column means that it's going to make the column of price here be one distribution, and then another group for another distribution, etc. Again, you can choose point size, you can choose mean median, you can choose your colors, etc. I'm just going to click on compute, and now as you can see, I've got my dot plots for each. Remember that you can always, make this bigger or smaller if you want, which sort of spreads it out. You can also click right down here, change the x-axis, y-axis, etc. Dividers, title, blah, blah, blah. So you get the idea. You've got a lot of different options here. But again, notice that they're all on the exact same scale, which is great. We can see very clearly that Chicago has an outlier here on the low side, pizza in Chicago, of course, they would have a cheap one somewhere. And you can kind of just compare these distributions for all of the different places. In order to make a histogram, notice I'm back over on my average drive length data. And I'm just going to go to graph and go to histogram. And again, choose whichever variable I want. And you can choose frequency, relative frequency, which of course would turn that into a percentage for you. Density, we're not really going to talk much about density, but really that's going to be sort of the cumulative frequency. So I'm just going to choose frequency, and again I can choose mean, median, etc. I can choose to give it a label, or I can just graph. That is my histogram. Notice again that the bars are nice and close together, and if I wanted to, I could double click on that, change the minimum and the maximum. I could click on my options and edit, and then I could choose my bin width to be something other than, I believe they have 5 right now, so I just made it 2, and now you can see that that made, you know, smaller bars, not quite as wide, and kind of changes the way that we see it a little bit. So make sure you know kind of what you want your scale to be, etc. You can also make a box plot just as easily, so I'm going to go to graph and then go to box plot. Average drive length. I don't really need to tinker with any of the rest of these, but I do want to see those fences to identify the outliers, and then just click compute. And if I wanted to, instead, as I can see here, I've got a couple of outliers. If I wanted to instead, I could edit and make these horizontally instead, which doesn't change the distribution, just changes the way that we look at it. But if it's easier for you, because now the number line goes, you know, from least to greatest, left to right, that might be easier for you as well. But again, make sure you go in and choose those options for your title, for your scale, etc. You can do all of that in StatCrunch very easily. If I want to compare my pizza prices again, I'm going to go back to graph and box plot. Just as before, I'm just going to choose. If I click shift instead of command, that chooses more than I want, so I'm just going to click command and choose those, and then groups for each column, and then again compute, and now it's giving me all of my box plots, and then it's a little bit easier for me to then compare my data.